Amen. I want you to turn tonight to Acts 23 and verse 11. We're just going to read one verse there and then quite a few verses after that in another chapter. Say amen when you get there.
Amen.
Well, before we read tonight, I want to go to the Lord in prayer and pray over this message tonight. Amen. Jesus, I ask you to move in this place tonight. I ask you to speak clearly through me tonight and to portray the message that you would have me say tonight. Let there not be any loose ends left tonight. Let people hear what needs to be heard. Or let people hear what needs to be heard. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Well, Acts chapter 23. Lately I've been reading about just the life of Paul. So I've been in Acts. So chapter 23 and verse 11. I'm just going to read the whole verse there. And the night following, the Lord stood by him and said, Be of good cheer, Paul, for as thou hast testified of me in Jerusalem, so must thou bear witness also at Rome. So that's God's, that's kind of God's will, or not kind of, that's God's will for Paul to be in Rome and to be there. And if you know anything about this, I'm sure you've read these chapters many times. Paul is, speaking. The Jews are trying to kill him, and he's going to different places, and his story's being heard, and he is on trial for his life, so to speak. And God comes to him and speaks him this. So he's in a hard time already. So I want you to turn now to chapter 27. I'm going to read this whole chapter. And I've always, before I get into this, I've read several novels, and a lot of the novels I tend to read are nautical type novels, so they have a lot to do with the sea and stuff like that, and I've always kind of enjoyed that. Nautical terms I thought were very interesting because that was the big business for years and years and years, and still the shipping is still a thing. It hasn't gone away, and I've always been interested in that, thought it was a neat thing. I always wanted to sail a boat, and so I kind of just leaned myself in that direction. And when I read this chapter 27, it reminds me, anybody ever heard of the book, it just slipped my mind, Robinson Crusoe. Have you ever read the part where he gets knocked out of his ship and he's getting thrown around in the sea and he lands on the shore? And I read this chapter 27 with Paul here going to Rome, and it reminds me of that. It's a very nautical type chapter, and what happens with the excitement of it. It's almost like something you read in a novel, but this is not a novel, amen. This is the Word of God. And I've read quite a few different ones, and they do their best to try to describe it as meticulously as they can. And honestly, this one is better because it's real, and the descriptions and terms that they use are interesting. But more importantly, this is God's will for Paul to go to Rome. And this is something that comes up along the way. And this is a trial for Paul. Also, he shines through in this trial, but I want to read this for you now. So just follow along. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus' band. So remember Julius, it just refers to him later as the centurion, but that's Julius. And entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail to the coast of Asia, one Aristarchus of Macedonia of Thessalonica being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh his health. So Paul's already, he's a prisoner. There's other prisoners on board. Paul's one of the prisoners, but God's already looking out for him. Paul's already been in a dark time over a long period. He's been in prison, under house arrest, and having to constantly defend himself against the Jews and against the Romans. So he's already been in a very dark time. And by the way, I want to title this message tonight, Heart of Darkness. So Paul is not even in the heart of darkness in this story, as we'll see yet. But it's just starting. But people are already on his side. You have people along the way. You have to have people believe in you. Amen. We've been in a time during while we've been here, and a lot of people that we've had faith in, or I won't say faith, but people that we've known have, questioned us. But there's also been people that have had faith in us no matter what, even when they didn't understand what we were going through at this church. And you know about what I'm talking about. So it's very vital, I think, and God gives us people that believe and trust in us. Even Paul, we see here, had different times, but we see this is one man. So for this, letting him have time to, people that visit him and stuff. So There at Sidon, Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. And we had launched from thence, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, the city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us therein. So I got a map printed off here. I always wanted to turn there when I was little. I'm like, why don't the preacher ever have you turn to the map in the Bible? That's the cool part. But you can see where we're at here. Though this is the bulk of the Mediterranean Sea. There's a lot over here that you don't see. But this is Paul's journey. So he started off here. And then right now he's on the bottom part of Asia, back then which was called Asia. So he's at Myra. So I want you to kind of get an idea of where he's at. It kind of has to do with the title of this message. So there, the centurion found a ship for them to go to Rome or Italy. And they were in another ship, but they've transferred to another ship. So I want you to pay attention to see how this story unfolds. So when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, the city of Lycia. And that's where the ship they found. That's where that's where Julius put them in the ship. And we had sailed slowly many days, and scarce were come over against Cnidus, the wind not suffering us, we sailed under Crete over against Salmon. And hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, nigh whereunto was the city of Lycia. Now then much time was spent, and then sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past. Paul admonished them. So the reason why it brings that up, talking about the fast, as I read this, I thought, what does the fast have to do with the dangers of the sea? Well, what it has, I looked up the date, which is interesting. It's September, they convert the calendar to today's time, so that would have been September 24th to October 1st, would have been about the time they were talking about there. So that's when the stormy season. So the winds at that time were very at their worst. So on the Mediterranean Sea, especially in that area. So this is close to the Ahlian Basin. So this is one of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean Sea that we're in here on the west side of Crete. So the winds at this time of year are very bad. So, but you remember that date. So we're just going to say it's October 1st because that's the earliest of it. So I want to go on from there. And said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be hurt with much damage, not only in the lading of the ship, but also our lives. So I want you to pay attention to that too. Earlier when I told you God came to Paul and told him about going to Rome, God spoke to him specifically. But Paul says he perceives here, so he has a feeling. He doesn't say God spoke to him. He doesn't tell them God spoke to him, but he has discernment. He's been serving God a long time. He's been under the gun a long time. He walks with God, so he perceives that this is not a good idea to leave now. The fast is over. It just means the time frame is not good, is what that means by the fast. So, nevertheless, the centurion believed the master. In other words, he believed the captain. The captain wanted to go ahead anyway. The owner of the ship, more than those things which were spoken by Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, and the more part advised to depart thence also, that means more people wanted to leave, then Paul was not heard at that time. He had a voice because he was Paul. God, Julius had already gave ear to Paul, gave him, by letting him have visitors and stuff like that. But Paul's voice was not listened to greatly yet, and because it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to stay there to anybody else's sense. But and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, so back then, this is not modern times. This is back then they had to winter at places very long. I know this is. That's the reason I said this message was going to be a little bit different than normal. I'm kind of just relating to you a story. I don't let God speak in this. So this is not. I don't want you to get bored and just. I want you to pay attention to the details of this story. Because there's a lot of very key things in this, underlying thing. So let's just move on here. Because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phinis, and there to winter, which is a haven of Crete and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. So if you look at it, Phinis, where they wanted to go, it doesn't show it on this map, but it's just right here. It's just barely any distance from Fair Haven. So it's just up here on this corner of Crete, the west corner. So that's where they were headed to, not very far away. And that's where they were going to spend the remainder of the winter. So considering you're a long ways from even Sicily, which is not even in Italy yet. So they just wanted to go from here to here to spend the winter. which would have been about, so you're saying, so it's about October, so that would have been about 3 months. So, let's move on here also. And when this, let's see, got back to my place, which is the haven of Crete, and lieth toward the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, and that's talking about the people of the ship, the master, the owner of the ship, not Paul, obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close to by Crete. So they're running the shoreline. But not long after, there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. When you looked it up, this means typhoon, whirlwind, which I thought was interesting. Brother Shute said, God's still God in the whirlwind. And they've been through that time right now. Their church was really messed up by that storm. So Euroclydon, when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, that just means it couldn't turn into the wind. And we let her drive. So they just let the ship just go where it would go. They just, it doesn't have an engine or a big old diesel motor on there. They just had to let the ship go where it will and drift. So, and running into a certain island, which is called Claudia, we had much work to come by the boat. So that's just right off the shore of Crete. So it's close to where they were trying to winter at. So they tried to pull into Claudia. All they could do is hard to come by the boat. So it's really hard to get the heading of the boat into this island, just to get away for the winter and to get off the water. But they couldn't do it. So they, which when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail and so were driven. So what that means is they had taken up and they used helps. That means they took ropes and bound the ship up. They guarded themselves up for what was about to happen. So they took ropes and wrapped around the ship to the ships were made of wood, obviously back then, nailed together, attached together. So they took ropes and wrapped the ship around like a burrito just to make it stronger for the storm. And they struck sail, and they didn't want to fall into the quicksand, so they struck sail and so were driven. So it's a little hard to look up the meaning of strake sail. They're not real sure what strake means, but I have an idea. What I feel like it means is it's just another word saying struck sail. So they opened the sails up, or they pulled the sails down. When you strike the flag, you pull it down. Strike the sail, you pull the sail down. And so they were just driven. So that's what I feel like it means. They didn't want to, they were heading in toward the island there, and so they pulled the sails down and just let it drive again. They couldn't make it. So this is kind of their last point, as you can see. There's no more land. They're trying to go to Italy. There's nothing else here. So that was kind of their last hope. So that's kind of it right there. No more land to get into for the winter. So they're just having to let it drive. They're seeing what's coming. This is a bad storm. And this is not, this is like they have a name for it. It's not just a big wind. all of them knew about the time frame, that the winds weren't good, but they were confident in their boat, confident in their own selves, that they could go forward with this journey. But Paul, then something else came up. This is Euroclydon. So this is not just the regular winds. So they're going ahead with this. And this is what's come up. So they struck the sail, and we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. Number one, lighten the ship. This is the first time they've lightened the ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. So it says by with our own hands, that means that the people of the ship, by the way, there was 276 people on board this boat. Everybody was pressed into service. So it wasn't just the sailors, because you've got to imagine there's a centurion. So there's probably 100 of Roman soldiers on board. There's sailors, and then there's prisoners, and then there's regular people that just need a passenger ride to Italy. And this was not something this boat was not commissioned by, Caesar to bring Paul to Rome. This is just one that the centurion found that was already going to Italy, and they hopped on board, basically. So everybody was pressed into service. So this is a very desperate time. And I believe this applies to all the things that we've been through. And we're in the middle of this. We're in the middle of this time. And what they've had to do is bind the ship up for this storm. So the ship's wrapped with ropes. Everybody on board, soldiers, sailors, passengers, prisoners, are all helping with the ship. So the tackling of the ship, a boat back then big enough to hold that many people would have had a lot of equipment on board. So they threw out the tackling, and that can mean different things, furniture type stuff, anything that the ropes affixed to, anything that was not absolutely necessary to run the ship, which is, I believe, a good parallel to what we need to do in our own lives. When you're in a time of desperation, it's time to commit yourself to what's going to happen, see what's happening. It's time to cast out the tackling, bind the ship up, gird your loins up, because You're about to be in the heart of darkness.
Dear God.
And this is not something that Paul did warn them. He knew what was going to happen. It wasn't like Paul said this was not God's will for us to go on this ship, I don't think. It just, he knew what was going to happen. Like one time we had a wreck on the way home from Christmas, and Dad had a foreboding feeling, or another time, I can't remember the exact story, and something happened. That doesn't mean we needed to stay at the house. I don't want to misunderstand this story. It doesn't mean we needed to stay at the house and just sit around on our haunches and not go forward with life because we get this spiritual feeling about something. So that's what Paul had. He didn't have a word from God. He walked close enough to God to have discernment to know something bad was going to happen. God, that's very important to know about this and to see in this, because I don't want to ever lift Bible characters up other than Jesus. Lift Bible characters up in the Bible and look at them as something I can never attain. I don't want to do that. And that he had this sixth sense like Spider-Man to do. I don't want to ever look at stuff like that in the Bible. I want to be able to serve God to the same levels, if not more. I want to always have that in my mind, and I want you to have the same. When you're serving God, don't limit yourself to your ability to serve God. And I know I've had this in my own life. I've seen it in my parents. I've seen it in other people. So God keyed Paul into what was going to happen. So he didn't tell Paul, don't get on the boat. He didn't have any choice. He's a prisoner. He had to go on the boat. So Paul's already spoken. That's why I wanted to read that verse first. God's already spoken to Paul that he's going to Rome. So this is how Paul's having to get there. And boy, is it unconventional. And it's probably not the way that Paul had in his mind that he wanted to get there. I know what he's talking. I know what that's like. God doesn't move the way that you think he's going to move or the way that you want him to move. And you see something bad's going to happen, but you have no choice. You have to get on the boat. You're a prisoner. And whether he's a prisoner or not, he's bound by God's will. Amen. I want to always be bound by God's will. Amen. Because I want to be tied to some kind of foundation. Amen. And not just some kind, God's will. So let's go on with this story. So they've got the helps on the ship. They struck the sail. There's no more hope of getting to Crete, or the island off of Crete, which was Claudia. And we cast our own hands to tackle on the ship. So that's where I was at last. Their own hands. So that means everybody helped cast the tackling off the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was taken away. So that's it right there. That's the heart of the darkness. So if you look out here, this is the middle. This is one of the biggest open areas of the Mediterranean Sea. There's another large area over here, but it's not quite as open and exposed as this part here. You got the Ahlian Basin up here. The deepest point in the Mediterranean Sea is real close to Greece right here, which I think it's 17,280 feet deep. So the average depth of this area is 4,900 feet. That's a lot. Especially back then, you're not on a big Maersk Line freighter boat, with GPS and diesel motors, which would be scary at 5,000 feet. Nowadays, you're back then on a boat with 276 people, and it's a long time ago, and you're in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, which is famous for taking out ships to this day. So you're out there in the middle of the ocean. No more hope. This is the worst time of the year for storms right now. So if you think about it, what do you see the hurricanes and stuff going on right now in the world? They're literally in the same time that we are. So keep that in mind. So this is storm season right now. I'm talking about 2018. And this is also the same time back then. This is storm season, 118, whatever it was. So that was the last. No more hope. And you don't hear about Paul for this time, but you're about to hear about Paul. He's kind of not around. So I'm sure he helped throw out the tackling because he said we ourselves. But on the third day we cast our own hands at tackling of the ship. When neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, no small tempest lay on us. The old English way of putting things, usually actually if you give it a chance, makes so much more sense. There wasn't no little old storm. That's what they were saying. There was a big storm the whole time. No sun, no stars. So the sun comes up, goes down, you don't know it. Stars come out, you don't know it. Just clouds, darkness. They say days and nights, so they had to have some kind of light. But, that's just the heart of darkness. They're in one of the deepest average parts of the sea. I looked at depth charts of the Mediterranean Sea. It just drops off there for miles and miles and miles. It's just the very deepest part. So but after long abstinence, Paul, so he was away for a long time and also fasting. Paul was not around. Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, "Sir," so he's standing up before he didn't have a voice. He warned them already. That's something. This is not going to be a good voyage. They didn't listen. They went with who made sense to listen to. Doesn't it make sense to listen to, Trump, or your teachers, and that's not knocking, I'm not knocking either one of those people I just mentioned, but people that are supposed to know because they have a degree or because they have the experience, and they're setting aside the will of God or what God's speaking. And I said, like I said already, it's not a knock against who I mentioned, but I want to listen to the will of God and be in tune with the will of God. Amen. Amen. I believe you had the same. So after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete. This is a prisoner standing up and saying this. This is one of the prisoners. These people don't know who Paul is. They don't know who he is. He's a prisoner. There's a bunch of other prisoners. What are prisoners usually, especially back then? They didn't usually go to jail for stupid stuff like now. Like you see nowadays. They were murderers and they did, but murderers and killers and just prisoners, people that need to be in jail. So Paul is standing up in the midst of them under 276 people that are all paying attention because they're in the middle of a storm. It's not like they're in cabin B and cabin A, everybody's playing, one family of five is playing checkers in room B. No, everybody's paying attention. Everybody's listening to Paul. The prisoner stands up and saying, I told you so. I mean, that's what the preacher's standing up. He's not given a platform. He's taking the platform because God's given him the platform. So we already know Julius likes him because he let him have his free way, but he didn't listen to him. So he doesn't respect him before. But Julius likes him. And there's many people, I've had many people on jobs and stuff that I've worked at that liked me a lot. But they didn't respect the gospel because it's so maligned nowadays. They didn't respect what was going on. They have no idea of it. They have no inkling of it. Sometimes it's not that they don't respect it. They don't know what it is. These people didn't know what Paul was. And I've had that many times in my own life. And you have a very small platform. You do have a platform. Julius did like Paul. But this time that Paul's standing up and taking his platform because God's doing a work here. And like I said, this is not Paul. You've heard my mom talk about pit, self-appointed pits, God-appointed pit. This is most definitely a God-appointed pit for Paul. He did not choose to be in this situation. So he said, Sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. So this is your fault. You didn't listen to what I told you. So and now I exhort you to, so after he scolded them, he says, now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. So nobody's going to die, but the ship's going to be destroyed. That's what he's saying. For there stood by me this night. Okay, now God's spoken to Paul.
Come on.
He doesn't have a feeling anymore. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. So Paul's already spoken to God before about going to Rome. He's already gone to Rome. If you believe God and God's spoken a word into you, you have to believe that God has already done that. God is going to do that work no matter what happens. Right. So if you look at the situation that they're in the heart of darkness, is what I'm calling this part of the sea. They're in one of the deepest average depths of the sea right now. Itchy nose. But they're in one of the deepest parts of the sea, one of the worst storms. It's the worst season for storms. The worst storm and the worst season for storms. They've already thrown a bunch of the needful, everything that was absolutely necessary to run the ship off. They've already lost hope. I already said that several verses back. Hope's already gone. They're just riding in the boat, just getting up, and you can't sleep all that time, so they're just getting up, experiencing the storm. So they're in a very, very bad time. Very, very bad time. Paul is right there with them. Isn't that amazing? Paul's right there with them. God didn't make him this little lighted cabin with little, tea and cookies. I mean, he's right there with them. But not only was he not in the middle of the storm, Paul had absent God. So he was seeking God. God spoke to Paul in the midst of the storm. So God's already spoken, and so I want you to remember that in your life tonight. If God's spoken a word to you, this is in Acts, but it's many verses back that we read in the beginning of the message. That God's already told Paul he's going to Rome. Paul believed God. Paul knows he's going there, but God comes to him again and says, Fear not. You have to be brought before Caesar. And he's given all I want to be the bonus. Amen. God gave all these people to Paul as a bonus. Because he was in God's will, doing God's will. Amen. That's what I want tonight. I want to serve God's will no matter what. And if I'm in a situation I can't help, I want everybody as a bonus. Amen. To me serving God. Amen. But God given thee all them that sail with thee. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God Amen. And a comma doesn't keep going. There's a comma. For I believe God. Amen.
Amen.
That's what Paul said, and I want to say the same thing. For I believe God, and you can end it right there. That shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must cast upon a certain island. So God's spoken to Paul what's happening. And you got to realize, too, they're still out there in the middle of the sea. Okay, so they're about right here right now, where my thumb is. So they have no idea where they're at. You know, like I said, they don't have GPS. They can't see the stars. So you're like, well, why can't you get a bearing off the stars? No, remember, they can't see the stars. They can't see the sun. So they have their maps and stuff are no good if you don't have a point of reference. You don't have a compass, and you can't. Your compass a lot of times back then would get knocked off by storms and stuff like that. You have to use the sextant to get with the stars, but there's no stars, so they have no idea where they're at. But we must cast upon a certain island. So the only hope, the inkling of hope that these people have right now is Paul. Only hope that they have is Paul. They've already given up hope. They've already thrown out the tackling. Everybody helped throw out the tackling. So everybody knows. None of it's being hidden from anybody. None of the little kids are like, they don't know what's happening. No, everybody knows what's happening. So the only hope that they're starting to get is Paul. But when the 14th night was come, okay, that's what I wanted to, I told you before. I preached this. We already know what the date was. It's probably October 1st. Okay, this is the 14th day. What's today?
14.
October 14th. This is the 14th night. That's where they're at right now. But when the 14th night, that's tonight, Sunday night, is October 14th. Amen? Was come when we were driven up and down in Adria about midnight. The shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. But they didn't know what it was. They just had a feeling, or they could, had an idea. There's smells. These people were, like Dad talked about the other day with the Indians. They were not scared of the woods, and these guys knew the sea. They knew what it could do. Of course, this is a scary time, but they know. They know that they're near a country, and sounded and found 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So that doesn't, I looked that up, that doesn't mean, I used to think, because they have echo sounding nowadays, you can determine distance with actual sound, but that's not what it's talking about back then. They basically had a rope, and they had, I don't remember the increments, but it was at different increments, they would tie a knot, and they would put real stuff that would get really wet. You could feel it, if it was night you couldn't see, you could feel it and see if it was wet, and it had a big lead weight on the end of it, and they would drop it down and pull it up through their hands and feel of the knots and see if they were wet. So that's what it means by sounding. And they used that a long time after that, many years after that, for determining depths. But I already told you that they have no comfort. They don't know where they're at. They're out in the middle of the sea, no hope. Paul comes up with this word from God. These people, they don't know God. More than a lot of them don't know God. Never heard of God, Jesus. They have their own gods, but this is the only hope they have. That Paul's told them they're going to land on some island. Nobody's going to be hurt. They don't know that. Paul, has God ever spoken to you something that was going to happen, but you still had to go through the storm? How many times have you questioned what God was going to tell you? God gave Paul the courtesy of retelling him that not only, I've already told you you're going to Rome. That could have been enough. God could have been, you keep going to the last get new marching orders. God gave Paul the courtesy, and I want to understand God enough to know that is a courtesy that Paul got, because if I get the same thing in my life, I don't deserve that courtesy. We have to hear God's voice to know where we're supposed to go, but we don't have to hear it twice. God gave it to Paul twice. He reaffirmed that God's will was to go to Rome, and that those people were going to be saved. So he got it twice on a bonus. Amen. I'm thankful for that, because that means God did it to Paul, he can do it to me. Amen. So they're out there. I'm talking about the average depth of this ocean. This is one of the deepest parts of the Mediterranean Sea, 4,900 feet. That's 4,900 feet. Okay, how tall are you? 5 foot, 6 foot tall? That's 4,900 feet. And that's where they've been for 14 days, just about around 14 days out in the middle of all that. So they sound, and they get, how many people know how many deep is a fathom? Anybody know? It's 6 feet. So they sounded with their fishing for depth. They stick their weight down there on a rope, basically with a bunch of knots in it, and they tie the knots at different depths. And one of them was it's odd depths, but it goes up in feet anymore. So they're still in dark time. The sun's still not out, but God will find a way to make it obvious that He is moving in your life. Amen. He may not come out of the clouds and pick your boat up. Sometimes that's what you want him to do. Pick your boat up and just set it over in the sunny shores and the beach with your little lemonade. That's what we want sometimes. But God made it obvious to them by just sounding, by one key thing, that they were not in the depth of the sea anymore. God was working. God was validating what Paul told him in privacy. He was validating it to 276 people in the middle of nowhere. So they're at 120 feet. They sound again, it's 90 feet. So at this point, you got to start thinking about the ship, which is exactly what they do. The ship is there. You see what's above the water, and there's so much below the water, which I can't think of the term for that at the moment. But how much the ship draws. But you have to start thinking about this. So they go from, okay, this is a reality now. They lowered a lead weight down there on a rope and felt, now this is legitimately 90 feet deep. That's not that, I mean, there's plenty of lakes around here that are much more than 90 feet deep. You're talking about the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. They've been through Euroclide, and now they're 90 foot deep. They sense that there's land near. So there's hope. There's more than just hope. This is solidified, but they're not off the boat yet. I mean, I've been there. I know what that's like. When I'm not off the boat, but there's definitely hope that I can't deny God's working. I can't deny it. I almost would like to, because I wouldn't have to be in limbo somehow. But God is moving whether you like it or not. God's bringing to pass what He told you whether you like it or not, because you're at 90 feet deep. So let's keep going on. So they're at 15 fathoms. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So they're just like, we don't know where we're at. We can't see nothing. It's dark. We know we're at 90 feet deep. They're just throwing them out for safety's sake. If we keep drifting, we might drift right into a rock and break up the whole thing. Now, this is not Paul again. This is back to the sailors. So this is just their natural training kicking in. So they wished for the, and as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat unto the sea under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. So if you listen, you read that again. As the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. Okay, what that means is they put people put flags up, different signals for what's going on with the boat, especially if you can't be seen or heard. You can look up the flag, and that means it's not the country flag, but it's a small, usually a pennant that tells what current state of command the ship's in. So they put that flag up as if they're lowering an anchor, but in reality, all the sailors were leaving the ship in a boat. And they'll leave everybody else on the boat anchored, and they're going to pretend that they're dropping their boat and getting away. But Paul notices this. See, Paul's the dude now. Paul's the guy, not the centurion now. The Julius, which is a centurion, he's that's a little different nowadays with night vision and M4s. That's back then when they had swords and shields. So this guy's seen hard times, and he's used to leading men, 100 men to be precise. But Paul's the one. See, back then you don't get those kind of jobs about just not being observant and not paying attention like nowadays. All these millennials, even though I'm one. But Paul sees this. Paul sees these guys, sees their deceit in the middle of this storm. Sees these guys trying to save themselves, but it's going to hurt the whole ship. It's going to hurt the whole thing. I don't ever want to be. We're not Jews tonight. We're all Gentiles. So I don't want to be a part of any of these sailors at this point. I don't ever want to be at this point in my life where I'm trying to deceive I'm trying to escape God's plan. They've already heard with everybody else that what's going to happen. That's the only hope. That's the only hope that they've got to at this point, was going off what Paul said. They're near land. Paul said no one's going to be hurt. They had no hope. I already said they had no hope. Now they've gotten a little hope, and they're going to shortcut. Yeah. Don't be that person. Right. Don't put up a flag. Don't go, oh, praise God, while you're escaping. Exactly. And how many times has that happened in the church? You come down here to the altar, you lift your hands, you lift your pennant. Hey, this is what I'm doing, everybody, while you're getting away. Mm-hmm. And you're shortchanging the will of God in your life. And you may sink a whole bunch of people right with you. That's right. Paul's going to Rome already, so that's going to happen. God's spoken the will of God to Paul, so that's going there. But there's a lot of other people that blood may on your hands. Amen. Don't be that sailor tonight. Don't escape. Don't escape before God is time. So let's go on from there. So Paul said unto the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. Somebody's like, hey, those guys are leaving. If they don't stay, it's not going to work. So the soldiers cut off the ropes and let the boat fall off. which I like that. It's kind of satisfying. Just cut the rope and there goes your boat. Sorry, bud. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day, that ye have tarried and continued fasting and have taken nothing. So these people ain't been eating for 14 days. Like I said, what's today? This is 14th of October. So they haven't been eating anything. So they're listening to Paul. Paul's got their attention now. You know, you hear about the soldiers and stuff, and I wasn't in the military, but, you know, I've been around plenty of vets, grew up around a lot of World War II vets, and talking about brothers in arms. Well, didn't have to be just battle and war. It's in a hard time. That's what they're referring to. People that were around in a hard place. That's what these people were like. And Paul's gaining their respect in the middle of this time. He's going from prisoner status to telling everybody what's up in the middle of a storm. So that ye have tarried and continued fasting and taken nothing, wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. For thou shalt not any hair from your head, fall from the head of any of you. Look and think about that. You can just pass that on right there and be like, no hair is going to fall on your head. Like, no, it's not going to be hurt. That's what it means. But how many times have you lost hair in the shower? I mean, you're scratching your head too hard, and you're washing your hair too hard, and you lose hair in the shower. Now, we're describing the minute level of God's protection over these people. They're in the middle of a storm in the boat. They're not going to be hurt so much as not even going to lose a hair. Okay, God doesn't just say that as like a cliche for joking. Like, I lose hairs when I'm taking a shower after I've been doing something fun, not been in a storm. These people aren't going to lose a hair while they're escaping a ship back in, who knows how long ago this was. So God's got you in his hand, that's what I'm saying. When God says he's going to protect you, no hair fall from your head, and you're going to make it through, that means down to the most minute level. And God knows, he's already told us how many hairs you got on your head. So he knows if you lose one or not. Amen. So you're not going to lose a hair through this time. You're going to come through this time. No hair is going to fall from your head. And we're going to make it through. Amen. That's right. So, let me get back to where I was. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. So they had church with 276 people on board a ship that's in the middle of a storm. The storm hasn't stopped, by the way. It's still raging. It still hasn't been sunlight yet. No stars. Their 4 anchors are out. They have no boat to get to shore with. The soldiers just whacked that off right at the rope, nipped that in the bud, because Julius is paying attention now. He's in the place of leadership. His ears are open to Paul. He has the soldiers, because he could have taken his men and put them in that boat and escaped that way, but he didn't. Just cut it off, nip it in the bud. So he's fully committed to what's going on here and what's Paul. He fully believes. And how many of you know that we need people that serve God like that?
Yes.
In the beginning, he didn't believe Paul, but he came into reason to believe Paul. I don't want to have to believe the man of God because I was in the middle of a storm and he ended up being right. I don't want to believe that. But some people are going to come in that way. And when they come in, don't come in halfway. Don't save the boat. Cut the boat off. And do God's will to the letter. They didn't hear God speak to them. God spoke to Paul. But they believed what Paul said. They believed the preacher. Amen? They believed what Paul said completely and desperately. So they cut it off. Boat gone. No more boat. So they had church after this. Centurions, prisoners, everyone. So they eat. And when they had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in presence of them all. And when they had broken it and began to eat, then they were all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And when they were in all the ship 216 souls. When they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. Okay, this is being committed right here. Remember I told you before, they lightened the ship. Time 1, when they went back in the earlier part, this is the second day after the storm, they lightened the ship. And then the part where they all together throughout the tackling, they lightened the ship twice. Then after that, they lost hope. What's the point? So not only did they listen to Paul, Paul's got a platform. They had church. They cut the boat off. And then after they eat, they lighten the ship again. So they're happy now. They have hope again. So they've done more work to save themselves now. So they've lightened the ship again. They're not hopeless now. So this is their third time. They lightened it second day, third day. This is the 14th day. They lighten the ship again. They've got hope again. People need hope. Amen. I need hope. We need people that believe in us. God gives us those things. You know, there's not been a time in my life that I know where absolutely no one believed in me. There's always been at least somebody. God's given me people like that. And people and friends, and there's always been reason for hope somewhere if I'm following after God. Somewhere. And it's no matter how small. This is small. 276 people going off of a stranger's word they heard, said he got a vision in the night from God and didn't say he was cuckoo. They're going off the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. So much so, like I'm going to reiterate again, they're in the middle of a storm. They cut the boat off. They've flattened the ship. They're in a bad place. But they've come all the way to this for 14 days. They've lightened the ship again, and then they cast out the wheat into the sea. So to me, that's being committed right there. No more food. They're not going to eat again. Paul's told them they're going to land on this island. They don't need the food anymore. Lighten the ship. Throw it out. They believe. Amen. They're going forward with what God's spoken. Even though God didn't speak this word directly to them, God spoke to the minister. And I want to be able to know. I want to be like these people in another way. Now the sailors, they're on the board with everybody else. Now I'm not going to judge them anymore after this point because they're not trying to escape now because they can't. But they're along with everybody else and they're being saved with everybody else. So everybody is believing God at this point. They're all casting out the wheat on the ship. And I want to be able to believe the man of God when I hear him. I want to be able to have that ability that I don't always have to hear God on my own, or it ain't gonna work for me. I want to be able to hear the man of God's voice. And go forward with that alone because I know that I can hear God through someone else. That is very important. God's spoken to me through someone over and over again. A lot of times it was my mom and dad because, they're my pastors and my parents. But I want to be able to always hear and through someone that's the right authority over you, they're the right ones. I want to always be able to listen to them, be in a place where I can be completely committed into doing what the will of God. And that's the way it is at this church. God's spoken certain things in this church. And I don't want to question what's going on in this church. There's certain things that God's spoken to my mom and dad about that he hasn't directly told me. There's things that I've been told by God, but I'm in this church. I want to be completely committed. I want to throw out the wheat. If I know this is where I'm supposed to be and I know I'm in the will of God, then I don't want to spend time questioning it or trying to escape under a pennant, saying that I'm doing something else, under a guise of doing something else. I want to fully commit myself to what's going on in this place. We're in this ship. I want to be a part of this ship because I don't want to cause anyone's hair to fall off. Amen. Not even that far. I want to go to God's word, God's will all the way. So they cast out the wheat. No more food. And when it was day, okay, that's the 14th day. Or maybe it would be the 5th, I can't remember. But when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust the ship. So they're like, it might be possible to shove the ship right into the land. So they're out a ways from the sea. It's 90 feet deep, so they're anchored at 90 feet. That's where they threw their anchors out at. But they can see the land. They don't know what it is, but they see a creek. That's how close they are. So 90 feet deep, if you've been out to the ocean before, played around on the beach, it doesn't take that far out there to get to 90 feet. I'm on probably a couple hundred yards. So you can see what's going on in the land. But they don't know what this is. It's a strange place. So when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea and loosed the rudder bands and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind and made toward the shore. So they pulled up the biggest sail on the ship, which is the mainsail. It's pretty obvious, but that they hoist up the mainsail, dropped the rudder bands. What that means back then, ships were steered with two flat oar-like rudders, and they were always tied up. And they untied those ropes and dropped the oars down into the water so they could steer themselves straight at the land. So they plan on sticking the boat right on the shore. So the storm is, don't forget the storm is still going on. So they're in the middle of the storm. They're fully committing themselves to the sea. Fully in desperation, because to me it's almost not even like desperation at this point. They've already believed just do it. It's time to just do it. You pull up the biggest sail, which if you know anything about ships with sails and storms, you don't hoist the mainsail in the middle of a storm. So they hoist up the mainsail, dropped the rudder bands, and steered straight into land. And falling into a place where two ships met, they ran the ship aground. 4 parts stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners lest any of them should swim out and escape. Remember, Paul's a prisoner. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose and commanded that they, does that sound familiar? Kept them from their purpose? Remember back in verse 13, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, losing nets right before all hell broke loose. Kept them from their purpose and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land, and the rest some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land.
Right.
Amen. That's cause for clapping your hands. I don't happen to long time ago, but this is a parallel to what God's doing. I know this is very similar to what God's doing in my life. And I wouldn't say that I'm on land yet. I mean, can you testify? Are you on land tonight or are you not? I don't know. But I want to make sure I'm committed, amen, to God. I want to throw out the wheat, cut the ship off, or cut the boat off. And when it's time for it, I want to see the land. Don't know what it is. I don't have to know. I just know God's will. And stick the boat on the shore. This is the final part of what God spoke to Paul. They were all saved. So they basically cut. Julius is, he believes Paul now. He's a centurion over soldiers, but this is a prisoner. He's in care. God's spoken through Paul. He saved all the prisoners for Paul's sake. And just basically tell them you get to land however you can. But they all make it. Not a hair falls from their head. Amen. And I want to be, tonight I want to be encouraged in myself as I speak about this story in the Bible. True story. And be saved. Amen. I want to be saved. I want to be all safe to land. Amen. When it's time to come. Because who knows, it might be tomorrow. Because I mean, this is the 14th in the story. Today's 14th. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. There's a lot of things I'm believing for. Why can't they happen tomorrow? But they were in the middle of a storm. They didn't know where they were at. You know, in some ways, I don't know where I'm at. I'm in the middle of a storm. All of a sudden, boom, there's land, and it's 90 feet deep. And hey, I can't help. I can't throw this out. God's working. And then you know, and then I just want you to lift your hands tonight.
Praise God Almighty. Jesus, Lord.
I believe God's speaking through this story in the Bible. You may be in a time in your life right now where you're in the middle of a storm and you have no sun and you have no stars and you have no way to determine where you were at. Like the other night when I was saying, I have no idea. Maybe that's where you're at. I have no idea. You're telling yourself that. But God is working. He's already spoken to you. Already spoken to you. Maybe God's given you the courtesy of speaking twice, like He did for Paul. And I want to be in tune. Amen. Paul in the middle of that storm. Everyone else was fasting, but Paul went away in prayer, came back with a platform, God-given platform, people to listen. Amen. If you want to come to the altar tonight, this is a very different message, very different, but I believe God's spoken to some people tonight in this message. I know He's spoken to me through this story. And sometimes it doesn't need the Bible doesn't need a lot of extra stuff. Just read what's in the Word of God. And I believe that's kind of what I've done tonight, is just read what's here. But if you'd like to come to the altar tonight, and let God do a work in your life tonight, and I mean come down here with purpose, as these people have, with commitment down here tonight. I don't care what stage you're at, because there's all levels of you could say, of serving God in this ship. There's Paul all the way down to the prisoners that may have killed somebody. Everybody was in the same storm. Everybody was saved by following the will of God. So if you come down tonight to the altar, let God do a work in your life tonight. Come down to the altar with desperation, commitment, saying, this is tonight. God's going to do something tonight. And there's no other way around it. God's going to do something tonight. And with complete commitment, God will do that work if you like to come to the altar.